Hello there and welcome back to another review. So today we're going to look at the first movie from the Yokai Monsters box set that I picked up from Arrow Video, and that is 100 Monsters. And it's hard to believe this was made all the way back in 1968, 69, I think it was 68, directed by Kimiyoshi Yasuda, who also directed a few of the Satoichi movies as well. Now this film was the first part of sort of a trilogy of movies that were made in the late 60s involving Japanese spooks, spirits and folklore, that kind of thing. The two films that followed this were also, we had Spook Warfare and we also had Along with Ghosts, but we're going to be looking at the first film today. As I mentioned, that is 100 Monsters, all of which I will be reviewing the other movies as well for you guys as soon as I get round to them. Now going into this movie, I had no idea what to expect. I wasn't sure if it was going to be sort of all out horror or like I was just going to find it confusing, as I have next to no knowledge about sort of yokai like whatsoever. So I don't know anything about Japanese monsters that much, so I had no idea what they were. The cover looked interesting. It was about Japanese monsters and sort of folklore and spirits like that, and it piqued my interest. I just thought I'd give it a go, see what these films are like, and go into it with like an open mind. Now make no mistake, these films are downright bizarre, they're surreal, they're strange, but there is an innocent charm to these movies, as you would expect. Lots of practical effects, lots of people in costumes, lots of puppets, that kind of thing. But I think the general consensus is, with a film like this that is called 100 Monsters, you're expecting sort of monsters throughout. You're expecting some sort of creatures, or like you mentioned, it's the late 60s, but you assumed it was going to be something more akin, I don't know, to sort of like Labyrinth or something like that, where there's sort of like puppets or something, creatures or whatever going on throughout the movie. It's not the case here. The effects are pretty standard and okay. There may not be exactly 100 monsters in it, far from 100 monsters, but this was the 60s, and this is the kind of movie it won't be for everyone. Some might even find the film a bit of a slog at times, despite the fact the movie not being overly long. But as I mentioned, there is a great amount of charm to these movies, and a lot of issues people have with this film is that the monsters aren't the focus. I think that's a general consensus with this film. When people do have complaints about it, it's that the monsters aren't the focus, and it's more like the plot is very generic and things like that. But that shouldn't dissuade you from giving these films a go if you like sort of old school sort of Japanese movies that have a sort of sort of a monster kind of fantasy twist. I think you'd probably have a lot of fun with these. But like I say, I went into this with a completely open mind. I had no idea what to expect in the slightest, but I still enjoyed it. I've had a good time with the movie, and it was just curiosity that got to me about these movies, and like I said, I had to just check them out. So it starts with this guy, Tajiyama, plans to tear down a shrine to build a brothel, and it's always these powerful lords and landowners, isn't it? Always trying to knock down or pull down something that the village people don't want them to do. And the caretaker, Gohai, is absolutely livid as they plan to pull down the tenement house too. Gohai gets beaten for good measure in the protest about what is happening. Jinbei, the guy who's sort of in charge of the property, owes like Tajiyama 30 gold pieces as he got his wife medicines and used the house as collateral. So we have this guy, fast forward a little bit, we cut to this guy telling the magistrate some ghost stories, right? And after each story ends, they must pull out a candle. And they start with the story of these fishermen on a hot night fishing where they shouldn't be, and this old monk sort of tries to warn them off. They catch a carp and some thunder and lightning ensues, and this voice tells them to leave. So they get home, and the wife of one of them who goes to cook their catch can't sort of wash off the blood. So after going to get some sake, his friend sees his wife's her neck just sort of extend and get bigger and bigger, which, to be honest, is really well done. And I think the monster, my pronunciation is probably going to be completely off here, but is it Rokorakubi? Is that how you say her name? Or something like that? I think that's the monster in question. I'm not going to attempt it again because I'll probably just get it even more wrong. But I think that is the one. But anyway, she has like this, her neck just keeps growing and growing, and right, okay, and like the image of her neck growing behind this wall in the shadows, and they're like wrapping her neck around him. I mean, for the time, you really can't give the film that much of a hard time, because I think the effects for the most part are done really well. The set design is really good as well in this movie. So after these stories end, the end ceremony ritual that they're meant to do is not performed, and whilst out, they hear a voice telling them to leave, and their lantern catches fire, and you have to love how it completely floats away at one point, and they're like, yeah, it probably just got lifted up by the wind, you know, like this lantern goes completely up into the air, and they're like, yeah, it probably just got, you know, the wind probably just took it, which I did find quite funny. Then we have like Kosa, I think it's Kosa Abaki, which can only describe as sort of like an umbrella with a face and an eye. And there's also this plot of this woman, Akuki, who is forced to go and work for the magistrate, so there'll be more so there'll be less trouble, and the magistrate, like in typical evil lord fashion, is like, she's finally mine. You know, and it just goes, as I say, he's got them evil vibes going on about it as he sort of glares at her in the process. So of course Tajiyama plans, like, he plays dirty and wants to destroy the land anyway. Now this is when you realise at this point in the movie that despite it being called 100 monsters, we as a viewer are not seeing much in the way of monster action. It's more really just about some thugs wanting to destroy some shrines and a building, so the title of this movie can be somewhat misleading. And like I say, I had no idea what to expect going into this. So at one point this green light appears in the sky, and one of the sort of the thugs, he's like, take that, and launches like this spear right at it, and this thing is like miles away, right? This thing is like incredibly far from him. Anyway, it gets launched back and kills him, and it's quite eerie at this point in the movie. It's like all the men have like there's a scene where they have like no faces, and like I mentioned, the set design is pretty cool in the movie, and like this reddish, there's like at this point there's sort of this reddish hue to everything here. Tajiyama's son now has loads of sort of the umbrella monster in his room, and they really should have performed that purification ceremony when they had the chance, because otherwise they wouldn't have these monsters giving them a hard time. But it's all the fact they were telling these stories, they was meant to do this ceremony afterwards, but they chose not to. So Tajiyama goes to investigate, and no sooner does he get there and he's approached by a giant head of this laughing lady. Like, this thing is huge, right? It's absolutely massive, which he tries to use his blade on, I might add. Ends up stabbing one of his men and falling on the blade himself. So out of nowhere, loads of monsters appear. And yes, I say, you know, it's puppets, for the most part, people in costume, but it's still actually quite creepy in a sort of charm, sort of light-hearted way. But it's sort of like, you know, it's silly and funny at the same time, and if that makes sense. And it all sort of, at this point here, it all sort of goes to slow motion as well. At one point this door gets open to reveal the giant woman in there again, which is probably the most creepy of them all. Anyway, sort of justice is served to these evildoers. They're all sort of scared witless and end up sort of like killing one another and themselves, and we see all these sort of dancing ghosts leaving their place. And the way this is shot and what you're watching, you really are in the land of the bizarre at this point. I've sort of really skimmed over this review because it's not it's one of these films, it's not that long, and in terms of the plot, it's not like there's a hell of a lot that really does happen in the movie. You know, it's not like it's one of them movies that's really convoluted and there's a lot of twists and turns, but at this point in the movie, when you see all the monsters and everything, you really know you're in the land of the surreal, right? You're in the land of the bizarre. Like, it's really trippy, and if you aren't open to this movie, you will just be, what the hell, right? You will be, what is going on? And they're sort of like, they sort of like disappear, sort of Field of Dreams style at the end. Like I said, I didn't go too much into the plot of characters too much with the review and other characters in the movie. I just wanted to like give you guys sort of a brief synopsis of what happened, and no doubt probably the future reviews from the Yokai Monsters box set, they'll probably be relatively short, because there's not, although there's a lot to say about them, I think it's one of these kind of movies, even if you enjoy it, you're not really sure why you enjoy it. And like I say, these kind of movies, they won't be for everybody, but there's so, like, in a way, almost playful and almost innocent, that you can't, they're so, like, sort of inoffensive, these movies, that, you know, I think I don't think you could really dislike it, because like I say, it's like there's not really a bad bone in its body, like these kind of movies. But if you like monster movies, you like Japanese movies, old school movies, you'll probably find loads to enjoy here. And it's definitely the kind of movie, like I mentioned, that it's not for everyone, and there are a few pacing issues here and there. For example, terms of monsters and yokai, for the most part, there is reduced. I think it's like, you know, with the monsters themselves, it's mainly really the last fifth of the movie that you do actually get sort of your monster action. And like I mentioned, the plot is somewhat generic, but my advice, if you are going into this for the first time and you have no idea what to expect or what is going on, just be open to it, give it a go, and judge for yourself, and just think of the film as sort of fun, scary, not like need to hide behind the sofa kind of scary. And the thing is, like with old school horror movies, from wherever they're from, usually they, you know, nowadays, you watch them and it's like, God, you know, did people actually find that scary? So it's not just like necessarily Japanese or, you know, movies from Japan or anywhere, but sometimes, especially old school horror movies, sometimes they don't stand up as well or hold up as well as they did. But I don't even think you can really call this a horror movie. I think it's more for fun. There's, like I say, there's an innocence to it, there's a playfulness to it, and like I say, I don't think you can really hate the movies. You just have to watch them, and if you enjoy them, great, and if you don't, you don't, you know. It's as simple as that. But if you have seen 100 Monsters or any of the Yokai monster movies, please make sure to let me know what you thought of them or what's your favourite, and maybe you've seen them and you just think, you know, they're not for you. But let me know in the comments below if you have seen these, what you think of them. But thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed the review. I'll see you again soon.
Don't concentrate on the finger or you will miss all that heavenly glory.